Have you ever thought about what it really takes to understand a sacred text that's over 1,000 years old? It's way more than just reading the words on a page. For classical scholars, it was a science of decoding. Let's dive into how they did it. So here's the big question. How do you bridge a gap of 14 centuries to truly grasp the original meaning? For the great minds of the Islamic tradition, this wasn't guesswork, not at all. It was a rigorous discipline, a really sophisticated method they developed to peel back the layers of time. You see, to these scholars, a single verse wasn't just a sentence. It was, it was a whole universe of potential meaning. And to explore that universe, they didn't just wander in aimlessly. They built a powerful toolkit, a set of scientific principles to guide their entire investigation. The formal name for this whole discipline is Tafsir. It's the science of Quranic exegesis, or interpretation. And its goal is pretty ambitious, not just to translate the text, but to uncover all the different layers of meaning, the linguistic, historical, legal, and even the spiritual, that exist within it. Okay, so let's look at the first and most fundamental tool in their kit. Before you could do anything else, you had to be an absolute master of the Arabic language. And I don't just mean fluent. We're talking a deep, almost surgical analysis of the text's most basic building blocks. Every single word was put under a microscope. Seriously, what's its three-letter root? How is it working grammatically in this sentence? And this is the crucial part. What are all the possible meanings this one word could have had for the people who first heard it? Nothing, and I mean nothing, was just taken at face value. We can see this exact thing in action with a word like Khalifa. Classical commentators would spend ages debating its precise shade of meaning. Does it simply mean someone who physically comes after another? Or does it imply something more active, like someone who deputizes for another and holds their authority? Depending on which way you lean, the entire interpretation of a verse could completely shift. So once they analyzed the text itself, the next critical step was to look at the information transmitted about the text. This meant digging into reports from the Prophet Muhammad and his companions that explained certain verses, and authenticating those reports was absolutely key. The tool they used for this is called the isnad, which is the chain of narration. Think of it like a human paper trail. For these scholars, knowing who passed down a piece of information was just as important as the information itself. An explanation with a broken or weak chain, it was considered totally unreliable. Here's a quick look at how it worked. A famous compiler like Al-Tabari, writing in the 9th century, would actually list his entire chain of sources. He'd say, I heard it from my teacher, who heard it from his teacher, like Mujahid, who heard it from a companion of the Prophet, like Ibn Abbas, who heard the original statement from the Prophet himself. Every single link in that chain had to be solid. And this verification process was incredibly detailed. A whole separate science of biographical evaluation, basically, grew up just to grade every single narrator in every chain. Was a narrator thiqa, like rock-solid trustworthy? Or maybe saduq, truthful but, maybe a little forgetful sometimes? Or was a narrator da'if, weak, or even worse, majul, completely unknown? Only a chain full of top-tier, trustworthy narrators was considered solid gold. All right, so we've got the language and we've got the transmitted reports. The third pillar of tafsir is context. Scholars would meticulously gather every scrap of information about the historical circumstances surrounding each revelation. Because for them, a text taken out of its context was a text that was fundamentally misunderstood. This field of study is known as asbab al-nuzul, or the occasions of revelation. What was actually happening at that specific moment in time? Was the verse revealed to answer a question someone asked? Was it after a battle? Or was it to address a particular social issue? All of these details was seen as vital keys for unlocking the true meaning. For instance, scholars would debate endlessly over whether a chapter was revealed in Mecca or Medina. And this wasn't just some dry academic exercise. Meccan verses from early on tend to focus on core beliefs in faith. But the Medinan verses came later, when the community was being formed, and they often contain detailed legal and social rulings. So the historical setting completely changes a verse's function and its implications. So after all this work, the deep linguistic dive, the intense vetting of narrators, the careful study of historical context, you'd think everyone would arrive at the exact same conclusion, right? Well, not at all. And in many ways, that was the whole point. This slide shows the result perfectly. You could have two giants of scholarship like Al-Qurtubi and Al-Nasafi apply the exact same toolkit to the exact same verse and come away with different yet equally valid interpretations.
Al-Qurtubi, being a master jurist, he might zero in on the legal principles you can derive. Meanwhile, Al-Nasafi might highlight its beautiful language or its deeper spiritual lessons.
So the crucial thing to understand is that the whole system was designed to reveal complexity, not to flatten it into one simple answer. The goal of classical tafsir wasn't to find the one single correct interpretation. It was to build a rich, comprehensive map of possible meanings that really honored the depth and the complexity of the sacred text.
And that kind of leaves us with a final thought to chew on. If scholars 1,000 years ago believed that properly understanding their foundational text required this immense, multi-layered scientific effort, what do we miss today when we try to do a simple reading of any complex historical text? What layers of meaning are just completely lost when we ignore the power of language, transmission, and context?